எல்லாருக்கும் வணக்கம். என்னோட பேர் Nithila. நான் University of Connecticutல computer science படிக்கிறேன். And இந்த அடுத்த few videosல ஒரு introduction to Python சொல்லப் போறேன். எனக்கு தெரிஞ்சது தான் உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் share பண்ண போறேன். So hope you enjoy. So what is Python? Python is a type of programming language. It's one of many. You may have heard of others like Java, C++, things like that. But one thing that makes Python different is that it's an interpreted language, which basically means that each line is interpreted at a time and then executed. So it can be useful for things like debugging, which is related to one reason why people use it. One pro is that it's easy to read and fast to develop. It's easy to understand because most of it's just plain English. And one con is that it's slower than some other languages because it's an interpreted language, like I mentioned before. It can take longer amounts of time to process, to evaluate each line of code one after the other, and how to use it. So you can use something called the integrated development environment. It's called IDE for short. And there's two different types of IDEs. There's a web or cloud-based IDE, which includes Google Collaboratory and Jupyter Notebook, and I'll be showing you a demonstration on Google Collab. And there's also local development, which would be stored straight into your computer, like Idle or PyCharm. Really quickly, how to access Google Collaboratory. If you have a Google Drive account, you would just go the same way you would go to make a new file, but you just click more and then click Google Collaboratory. And I'll show you right now. This is what it looks like kind of when you open it up. So we'll be using that later on. So to get into more of the programming kind of stuff, so some stuff to know. This is kind of in general to all programming languages. There are different data types. So these are three of the most popular ones. So int, it stands for integer, which is just any integer value. And in Python, it's represented by the int parentheses. Float data type is basically a decimal point value, anything with a decimal point. String data type is denoted with quotation marks. In Python, you can use either single quotes paired up or double quotes paired up, and that's represented with the str. And in order to check the type of a certain variable in Python, you can use the command type parentheses, and whatever variable you put in the parentheses, it'll output the type of that variable. So I can give an example. So if we create a string variable, say we call it word, and I can put hello in there. So if we do type word, it should print out string. So these are some more basics of programming. So I used the word variable just then. This is basically this is a word that basically stores data. So in Python, there are certain naming restrictions. So it must begin with a letter or an underscore, and it can only contain letters or numbers in the name. And something that's unique to Python is that you don't need to declare the type. So right here, I didn't have to declare that this was a string in any way, but in other programming languages like Java, you would have to indicate that it's a string variable. Another common vocab word for programming is input. This is data that the program gets through the user, whether that's through a file or typing through the keyboard. In Python, that's taken using the command input parentheses. And this input, it defaults to a string, but you can cast it to another type using those data type commands I showed you before. And you can also put a prompt within the parentheses for the user. So I can show an example. Let's delete that. So I can create, I'll create another variable, but in this instance will get input from the user, and I'll say enter a word as the prompt. All right, so that's the prompt, and then if we run this, it gives me the place where I can input. So I can put hello, and I click enter, and I mean we can print. Let's print the word. So again, asks me. So I put in hello, and it prints hello. And then, yeah, so that printing statement I just did is an example of an output. So output is just data that is displayed or put somewhere. So either it's returned or it's printed out onto the screen. There's certain formatting rules you can do. So one example is the squiggly bracket, the curly brace formatting. So that's useful when you're printing. And you want to have placeholders for the input you're printing out. So, for example, we can create 3 variables. So we can create input 1, and then input 2. All right, and say we want to print out all 3 of these. So we could do this. We can say A is, and then we would want to put the value of A. And so to do that, you would put the curly brackets. So A is curly bracket, B is, same thing, and C is. And then here, you would do dot format and put A, B, and C. So whatever you put in that dot format place will fill in like the placeholders where the curly brackets are. So if we run this, it'll ask me for the input, and see, since we didn't put any prompt inside, it doesn't give any prompt this time. So we can do 3, 7, 4, and it prints it out. A is 3, B is 7, and C is 4. Another formatting for printing is the end equal. So this basically joins 2 different print statements, basically. So we could do, I'll take this out. We could do A is, use that same thing. And then you would put comma, you put end equals, and then you put a space. You could put a space, or if you don't want a space, you just leave it like that, 2 quotes. I'm going to put a space. So basically it joins whatever's here with a space and then whatever comes next. So print B is format B. Okay, so if we, I'm going to give the same values. Okay, so yeah, see how even though we have 2 print lines on 2 different lines, it joins them as one with a space in between. We could put anything in here like a comma. You can see how that changes that. And then adds a comma right there. So that's useful for when you're trying to do different types of output. And then this /new line, it just creates a new line. So you could do, if you take this out and you put right there, it'll output these 2 as in 2 different lines. And yeah, so automatically it'll put it into different lines, but because of the new line, it's creating a space between the 2. So again, useful for formatting. So going on to common operators. First, there's basic arithmetic, just the plus, minus, the asterisk for multiplication, and the slash for division. And there's also something called integer division, where you use 2 slashes, and this just it divides normally, but then it just gets rid of the decimal point. And Python goes by the same rules of PEMDAS, which is the order that you evaluate. So first you do whatever's in the parentheses, then you do exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Modulus is the percent sign, and it basically acts as when you're trying to find the remainder of something. So 10 modulus 3 would be 1, because 3 times 3 is 9, and then 10 minus 9 is 1. Exponentiation, you do use 2 asterisks, so I can show that. Let's get rid of this. So print, or I'll create a variable. So A equals, we're trying to square, we can square 2, right? So you would put whatever, the base first, then the 2 asterisk, and then whatever power you want. And then we can print a 4 right there. Then you have relational operators, which is the greater than equal to, less than or equal to, then equals, and then not equals. So equals is different than just the 1 equal sign, where it's the 2 equal signs is asking a question, like asking if whether they're equal or not, while just the 1 equal sign is more of an assignment operator. It's assigning something to the variable. And the not equals is asking that question, are these two are not equal, basically. There's also logical operators, which are and, or, and then not. And these just, again, compare two kind of things. We'll talk about them more in the next video when I go over loops and such. So the last thing in this video are data structures. So data structures are basically a collection of data values that are organized in a way that can be efficiently modified or accessed. And these are just three of the main ones in Python. So the first one is lists. This is just a sequence of data values of any type, and it's denoted with two brackets, and this is something you can iterate through. List 1 is equal to, and then I could put anything in here. I could put a word. I could put a float, and that would be a list. I can print the list. There we go. And each thing in here is called an element. So this is the first element, 3 is the first element, 7 is the second element, hello is the third element, and then 8.0 is the fourth. And this is something you can iterate through, which we'll talk about in the next video, what that means. There's also dictionaries. This data structure, it pairs a key to a certain value, and it's denoted with curly brackets. And this is something you can also iterate through. So maybe you say dict1. So this is something kind of if you're trying to pair two items. So we can have the key be a number, so key, and then you would use a colon, and then say first, something like that, and then you would put a comma. So that's your first pairing, basically. So the 1 would be the key, and then the first, that's the value. And you can put any data type in the dictionary. It could be any data type for the key and any data type for the value. It doesn't matter what it is. I could do the opposite. I could do second colon 2, like that, and so that's a dictionary. I can print this too. There we go. And again, you can iterate through this in many different ways that we'll talk about in the next video. The last data structure is called a set, which is basically a list of unique unordered values. It's also denoted with the curly braces, but this is something you cannot iterate through. So that's an important distinction between the dictionaries and the lists. So I can show you what it means. Basically, what does unique values mean? So I'll just put a string of numbers, but again, you can use any data type in the set. And I'm going to repeat 5, and I'll put another 4 in there. And if you print out set 1, you can see it gets rid of the duplicate 5 and the duplicate 4, and also it changes the order completely. So it doesn't matter what the order is, and because of that, you can't really iterate through it in a structured way. But still, this data structure is very useful. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, but stay tuned for next week where we'll talk about functions and loops in Python.